Good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming early in the morning, I know. Yeah, few words about me. If my clicker starts working, it will when I turn it on. Awesome. Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm from Bonn in Germany. I work at a company called cant. We're one of the sponsors. So if you all could do me a solid and Google our company and go to cant.de to show my boss that it's worth it sending me to all these conferences, that would be awesome. Also, we are awesome too. Anyway, I'm a tester, but recently I've been doing a lot of other things, so I'm kind of struggling to define my role. That's why I put tester ++ there. I used to be a mathematician in another life, not my best idea ever. I'm on social media if you want to get in touch. I'm still on Twitter, currently on a cleanse. But I'm also on Mastodon, that's my instance up there, and on Blue Sky. And if anybody fancies an invite code, chat me up. I'm going to preface what I'm going to say with a super quick content note. I'm going to talk about mental illness, including, but not limited to, depression, anxiety, and eating disorder. There will be mention of verbal harassment, physical illness, in particular cancer, still the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine. So if any of this is too much for you today, feel free to leave and look after yourself, and that holds true for the entire talk. I won't be offended. But I don't have much time, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you the story of how I got here. The girl in that picture with the bad haircut, that's me when I was 22. I look quite happy in that picture, right? Healthy and relaxed and living the good life and everything. But that's far from the truth. I didn't really know what was happening to me. I just knew it felt absolutely, completely and utterly wrong. Uni wasn't going well. My boyfriend back then and me were fighting all the time. And without even wanting to, I was pulling away from all of my friends. I alternated between feeling sad and scared and overwhelmed and lonely, and then again feeling nothing at all for days and weeks on end, which in turn scared me senseless. The predominant emotion was a sense of just wrongness, of I don't want this, I can't do this. And I didn't even know what this ominous, scary this that I couldn't do might even be. I decided I had to do something. And the thing I decided to do was to lose weight. Smart, huh? Perfectionist young woman feels out of control of her life, controls body instead. It's so textbook, I still roll my eyes at myself sometimes. Half a year after this picture was taken, I had lost more than 10 kilograms of body weight, around 75 kilograms of boyfriend, and pretty much all perspective. Now, 10 kilograms maybe doesn't sound all that much to you, but on an already slender frame, it pushed me well over the edge of unhealthily underweight and made me look like a skeleton in a skin leotard. Wasn't pretty. And if you need a mental image, subtract like an arm from that. You might be wondering why I'm showing you a before picture and not a drastic shocker picture to prove my point. The reason is that for people with an eating disorder or body image issues like I have, looking at pictures of extremely skinny people can be triggering, and I don't want to trigger anyone, even if it's only me. When I finally admitted to myself that I needed help and went to see a doctor, I was diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and eating disorder, and I spent the next few years in therapy and on antidepressants. I don't want to dwell much on how I got sick or how I got better. That part, at least, is fairly straightforward. Pharmaceuticals helped, and when they had helped enough, so I was ready for that, therapy and working on myself helped more. To get to the heart of what I want to talk about today, we have to fast forward a bit. I was finally done with uni, but it had taken a few more detours and a lot longer than it should have. Try doing math when all you can focus on is staring at the ceiling and not eating. So it took a while. and my CV looked bad, and I didn't want to explain the reasons why in a cover letter, because that's just not something you do, right? So I was afraid I was essentially non-hireable. Until one day, I went on an interview. That seemed to go okay, let's say okay. Until, obviously, the inevitable question about all the lost time came up. My interviewer obviously wasn't buying my evasive answers, and he even called me back the next day. He said something like, "You know what, Sophie, you're obviously a smart cookie, but something went wrong there. What was it?" And then I decided to gamble and told him about the eating disorder part of it, but nothing else. I hoped that that would be just enough to explain the gaps, but not so bad that he'd think I'd relapse under the slightest bit of pressure. And it worked, and he hired me. I was, and to this day, I still am, really happy at the company. But, skipped a slide, happy at the company. But in the beginning, I was constantly worried that I'd slip up and somebody might find out my super deep, dark, super secret. You see, not long after my diagnosis, I had started speaking about mental health, or in my case, lack thereof, with friends and family, and if I'm being entirely honest, occasionally random strangers at parties or something. I'm fun at parties, I promise. But I had started speaking about it because once there were words for this blurry, scary well of feelings and worries and everything, and the initial shame of not functioning properly had worn off, I had decided that I wasn't going to be ashamed, because it's bad enough to have to deal with the monsters in your head without feeding them guilt or shame, because that's what they eat for breakfast. But at work, I didn't dare. You just don't talk about that at work, I thought. I didn't want to be seen as weak or vulnerable or unable to withstand stress or pressure, least of all by my boss. So at work, I did the whole conceal, don't feel. I'll stop singing now. But then one day, some of my colleagues and I went to a conference for the first time together. It was the Agile testing days. I don't really know what I expected, but certainly not what I found. People there talked about mental health in a professional context, at a tech conference of all places. I was stunned. There was a talk about burnout, which I really enjoyed, the talk, not the burnout. And afterwards, I asked the speaker how he had explained his absences to his boss, to which he answered, "Well, I said the truth, duh." And that got me thinking. Commitment, focus, respect, courage, and openness. We probably all know these values by heart, right? But was I really taking them to heart? Trying to hide my own history, my part of myself, certainly didn't feel courageous or open. And couldn't I trust my boss and my new colleagues to still respect me if they knew the truth? As it so happened, I had a performance review coming up on the very first day back at the office after the conference. Not ideal timing, because I was badly sleep deprived, I was still in sensory overload mode, so I was talking way too much and way too fast, but I was determined. And I started the review by telling my boss the whole truth about my mental illness. I think I overran him a little. He wanted to talk performance, and I went all truth talk on him. But he was gracious enough to thank me for my thank me for my honesty, and he didn't even fire me for being a wimp. That was a surprise, honestly. But from then on, I didn't hold back anymore. When the topic of mental health came up, I'd just talk about it with anyone, even at work, simply enough. And today I'd like to share with you 10 lessons I've learned from that, from breaking the taboo and speaking about mental illness. The first one, bless you, may seem obvious, but it wasn't to me. You're never the only one. You know, when you mention therapy or illness in any group of people, there's often enough somebody else who responds with their experiences. I think that's a simple matter of statistics. According to one report I found, it was the State of Health in the EU report of 2018. During the course of that year of 2018, around 17% of the population of the EU had a mental health problem. That's more than 1 in 6. So it shouldn't have come as a surprise that as soon as I started talking about the bad stuff with my colleagues, I learned that I wasn't even the only one who had been through tough times, or at least had a loved one who had. It shouldn't have come as a surprise, but it did. You can almost never tell from looking at people or from day-to-day chit-chat in the office kitchen while you wait for your coffee. If people don't tell you, their struggles are mostly invisible. So I remember feeling completely isolated when I first got my diagnosis. Everybody else was dealing with life, the universe, and everything, so why wasn't I? But then it dawned on me that other people, absolutely normal people, have had the same thing, have struggled, and have gotten better. And that revelation comforted me a lot. This is already one of the main reasons I talk about the topic so often. Maybe if I speak up, I myself make somebody else in my situation from back then feel less alone. And I like to pay it forward. I think it's worth it. Lesson 2 is openness inspires openness. One day, after I had started talking, a coworker entrusted me with a secret that he had never told anybody at work before. He didn't even want to keep it secret anymore, but he said he didn't know how to start speaking about it. But, he said, with my openness, he felt safe to confide his story in me. And a short while later, he told a few of our other colleagues over lunch, and today it's no longer even a secret. When we were chatting the other day, I said something along the lines of, I'm sorry, I'm oversharing again, but if I don't mention the taboo stuff, none of my other stories make real sense. And he said, yeah, I know what you mean. Before I started talking about the dark things, I simply didn't talk all together. And that's as true as it is sad. Taboos and secrets can take up so much of your headspace that they seem to overshadow everything. But in my experience, if you bring them out into the open, they lose some of their power over you. And that gives you just more room to be you. Having helped someone become more comfortable with talking about themselves taught me something that I think is rather beautiful. Sharing your secrets, even the bad ones, the dark ones, the shameful ones, can turn them into a gift. It's like a little token of safety and of understanding that says, I share a piece of me, so you can share a piece of you. Lesson 3, openness is a habit, not a character trait, is about another change I noticed, and that was within myself. Maybe it's the mirror image of the last lesson. You know, I have anxiety, and that makes it super hard to share my opinions, especially if I have to contradict someone. In an agile team, probably any team, however, you have to be able to say, hey, I think we're going wrong here, or I think we should do stuff differently, because courage and openness and shared responsibility and all of that. I used to think that being able to speak your mind freely and openly is a character trait that you either have or you don't. And I was one of the unlucky people who just didn't. Tough luck. But I have learned that openness, much like confidence, is openness, much like confidence, is like a muscle that can be exercised. It's still not always easy, but just like with exercise, when you start, it's hard, and your muscles get sore, and maybe you don't want to do it ever again. But the next time you try, it feels a little easier, and maybe the ache afterwards isn't just as bad. So over time, it gets easier and easier, or it feels easier and easier, because it's always hard, but you get stronger and stronger. And strength brings me to lesson 4. Showing vulnerability shows strength. Being a sensitive person plus depression plus anxiety equals I have never had a thick skin. Grievances have always gone straight to the bone and kept smarting forever. When I was young, I was called a wimp and a crybaby for it a lot, which I obviously hated. So I've always been a very conflict-averse person, especially at work. But conflicts happen, even in super harmonious teams. One day, for example, I had this stupid misunderstanding with a teammate. He said something which I didn't like, and in that moment, I didn't say anything and told myself he probably didn't even mean it the way I understood it, but I kept obsessing about it for hours and hours. Just didn't leave me alone. The old me would have probably just let it ruin my day, put a dent in my confidence while putting on a happy face. But the new and improved me, the open and talkative version, didn't want to do that. So I tried a revolutionary new approach and told him I was bothered by what he had said and why. Look at me standing my ground and making I statements. My therapist would be proud. We did the adult thing then. We talked the problem through, sorted out the misunderstanding, and have a much improved communication ever since. Admitting I was hurt hadn't made me weak in his eyes. On the contrary, he said he appreciated me facing the issue and making him aware of it. It makes me wonder, why do we generally think of people who struggle with things as weak? We all have our vulnerabilities, our trigger points, and conflict resolution, healthy conflict resolution, is super hard for everyone. Imagine doing that with a chemical imbalance in your brain. That takes a lot of strength. And by admitting I was hurt, I had proven I have that strength. So, if I pretended all lessons I learned are good lessons, I'd be a liar, so I have to share the bad ones too. Lesson 5 is some people just don't get it. Super quick audience participation here. Quick show of hands. Who here has ever had a broken bone? Arm, leg, anything? Wow, a lot of klotzes here. And who of you have then been asked, have you tried not having a broken arm? Surprise, surprise, no one. You can't just Jedi mind trick your bones into being unbroken somehow. Your body needs time to heal. And with some physical ailments, time doesn't do the trick. That's why we have doctors and medicine and surgery and plaster casts and radiation and bandages and syringes and all that stuff. And there's no shame in needing any of that. But when it comes to mental illness, some people don't apply the same logic. When it's your head that's sick, it's all in your head. I have to admit, that is true. It is all in my head. My head is where I keep my thoughts and my feelings. Why would it being in my head make it any better? Some people don't understand that, so they give super unhelpful advice. So I've been told to look on the bright side, to count my blessings, or my personal favorite, to just stay positive more times than I can count. But that's not how it works. You can't just stop being sick and be awesome instead. And this lack of understanding for mental illness is more than just an annoyance. It's dangerous. Because when you are constantly told that the thing you're dealing with is not a real disease, you might not see a doctor and you might not take your medicine. But it is a real disease. And it's potentially fatal. So don't laugh it off. Don't shrug it off. And don't make people feel bad about taking potentially life-saving medicine. So, how do you deal with these people, those that don't understand? I have no idea how you're supposed to deal with it, but I can tell you what I do. I have, over the years, accepted that some people just don't get it. And that has, sadly, painfully, meant the end of more than one friendship. That doesn't mean I've stopped caring. Not caring is not exactly easy when caring too much is part of your diagnosis. So I still try. I try to explain to people what it's like, and I try to let it go when that is fruitless. Lesson 6 is kind of my least favorite one. Some people get it really badly wrong. It's where things get weird. As you can probably tell right now, I speak quite openly about very personal things. And sometimes this openness gets misconstrued as either being flirty or as a desperate cry for attention. Weirdly, it's pretty often specifically male attention I'm crying desperately for. I don't see how you can understand my brain doesn't produce enough of the happy chemicals as an invitation, but it has happened more than once. One day, for example, I was at this party talking to this random dude about openness and my ideas about openness and how we should all talk and everything. And when I was done rambling, he said, "You know what, Sophie? I really, really like your openness. And while we're all being so super open here, here's what I like in bed. And oh, by the way, I've been thinking about doing that to you the entire time you were talking." Really not cool, random dude. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean any kink shaming. He can be into whatever in the world he wants to be into. But what he said and the way he said it, to me in that situation felt like he was verbally waving his genitals in my face. It was so intrusive. Maybe he didn't even mean any harm by it. Maybe it was his very clumsy attempt at a flirt, or maybe he was, by some twisted logic, convinced that he was cheering me up by complimenting me, or something. But maybe, and I think that's the rather more likely explanation, he was trying to exploit my perceived weakness, my confidence issues. And that's appalling. It's predatory behavior, and I'm not easy prey. Thankfully, I haven't had many of these encounters, so let's get back to the happier lessons. And this is one of my favorites. It's people want to help you. Let them. Let me begin with a story here. When I was first planning to fly on the job, I had a problem. Because I have a phobia of flying, and it's really bad. Really bad. I cry, snotty tears. I yelp, I hyperventilate. I kind of lose my street cred. I obviously didn't want my new colleagues to see me like that, but I knew it was going to happen, And I knew there was nothing I could do about it, short of getting entirely wasted on the plane, but that wasn't going to happen either. So to get ahead of the embarrassment, I tried the self-deprecating humor thing and told one of my colleagues. I said, just so you know, I'm going to go completely unruly passenger up there. Ha ha ha, silly me. But she didn't laugh. And she didn't tease. She didn't seem to find it embarrassing. She said, what can I do to help? Mind blown. So I told her the things that keep me calm, or if I'm being real, calm-ish during a flight. That's distracting me and reminding me how to breathe, because that gets really hard and I forget how that works. And that's what she did during the entire flight. She turned out to be an amazing flight buddy. And not only that, there were 6 of us on that plane, and none of the others rolled their eyes at me or laughed. Even the ones that I hadn't briefed chipped in and helped me and distracted me from the fact that we were trapped in this scary, loud metal box that has no business being that high up in the air. And after touchdown, it felt like we had survived an amazing adventure together. My fear of being laughed at for my silly phobia had made me forget one very important thing. And I should get that tattooed. Most humans are kind. And they will want to help you if you let them. It's no wonder, really. Helping others is very rewarding. We probably all know the warm, happy glow it gives us in our tummies, right? Right? Yeah. Psychological research shows that helping others boosts your own well-being and can even lower depression. Still, I know, asking for help and accepting help is hard. But look at it this way. If you do, you get the help you need, and they get the endorphins. It's a win-win situation. And if that doesn't convince you, and you think that people will like you less for being a burden, consider this guy. He tells us that a person who has helped another person before will be more likely to help them again than if they had been the ones who had been helped. Because cognitive dissonance tricks them into thinking that if they have helped you, they must obviously like you, right? And so they do. It's called the Ben Franklin effect, and I'm pretty certain you can see it in how people who bum cigarettes at parties make friends so easily. And friends is the topic of lesson 8. There's strength in numbers. You know, people who struggle with mental illness become masters at coping mechanisms, ranging from healthy to, let's say, not so healthy. There's breathing exercises and mindfulness journaling and gratitude apps and stress buying pretty sequin dresses online. That's my go-to. I have a lot of pretty dresses. But I know it might not feel like you are good at coping, or good at anything at all for that matter. But trust me, you are fighting an uphill battle against an enemy that likes to fight dirty. And so far, you've made it through every single day of that battle. You are fantastic at coping. But there are days when none of these mechanisms seem to work. And there are days when you are sick and tired of even fighting it because, God damn it, why does it have to be a fight all the time? Why can't it be easy? Just for once, please, please. But at least you don't have to get through these days all on your own. Once you start talking, like I mentioned, you find others. Sometimes it even feels like people with mental illnesses flock together even before they know they have that in common. Everyone is fighting their own battles, yes, that's true. But that doesn't mean you cannot help each other out. I now have friends and colleagues with whom I can have convos that go like this. I say, hey, do you have the headspace for me to whine about something? Consent is important here too. And then they answer, yeah, sure, what do you need? Do you need to vent or do you need advice? And then, depending on what I want or need, they say, okay, calm down, let me rephrase that thought for you. Or they say, tell me 5 things you can smell now. Or they say, okay, I'll be your void to scream into then. In this battle, we have each other's swords and bows and axes. And isn't that something? Okay, lesson 9 starts out painful, for me at least, but we'll get through that together, and I promise it gets better in the end. You know, I've been doing this talk for a while now, and when I first conceived of this talk, first wrote the first proposal, that was back in early 2020. I think the CFP closed in February or March, something like that. And I was going to say that it's been years since I needed therapy or meds, and I've been doing just fine, and look, mommy, no training wheels. Maybe I jinxed it, because since then, a lot has happened. First, maybe you've noticed 2020? Awesome year, right? There was obviously the thing with the pandemic you might have heard of. I would have struggled with that and social distancing alone. Staying at home all the time, never meeting friends and family, and always being in sweatpants. Honestly, showering a little too seldomly reminded me an awesome lot of my most depressed days. It would have been enough to topple me. But it got worse for me when in April 2020, just when the first wave was finally beginning to ebb down a little, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I'll spare you the details. Okay, one thing, because it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, one thing I'll not spare you. Early detection saves lives, so make sure to check your boobs regularly, and that holds true for man boobs and obviously non-binary boobs too, so just check them regularly. But anyway, where was I going with this? I'll spare you all the gory details about how much going through cancer treatment in a hospital on lockdown during a global health crisis just sucks. Suffice it to say, it was quite a bummer, and I'm back in therapy. Or at least I would be, if the last one I've been to hadn't been a total disaster and I rage quit. But that isn't the point. The point is, if I had never opened up about having struggled with my mental health before, would I be able to say that now? I'm in therapy. Or would I try to hide it and make up excuses every time I leave the office early in order to go to therapy? I don't know what I would have done. I just know I'm happy I don't have to think about it. I can now simply say, hey team, I'll be off for an hour or 2. I'm going to get my head shrunk. Bye-bye. And leave. And that makes my life so much easier right now. Okay, last lesson. Everybody should know the oxygen mask rule. Because people ask me often, what's the most helpful thing you learned in therapy? And I always tell them the story of the oxygen mask rule. And I'll tell you today so everybody can get a free bit of therapy. You're welcome. So one day, in one session, my shrink said that maybe I needed to stop thinking about how to make others happy and put my own happiness first for once. And I had to admit she had a point. I was constantly worried about making my parents proud, about being a good friend, a great sister, and an awesome girlfriend, and I never stopped to wonder how I was treating myself. Now that she forced me to think about it, I had to admit that I was rather mean to myself. I was constantly nagging, calling myself names that I wouldn't call my worst enemy. I was literally starving myself, and I never took care of my emotional well-being at all. I thought that as long as I was nice to others, that was okay. I even fancied myself a bit selfless. But as my shrink said, taking care of yourself is not only not selfish, it's part of your job as a fully functioning adult. It's like brushing your teeth. I say this fully aware of how hard self-care can be, and how even brushing your teeth can feel like a daunting task. But as with your teeth, making an effort with your mental health is worth it. Because if you don't make an effort with your mental health, you will have to take an effort with your mental illness. If you don't take care of yourself, somebody else has to. It's like what they tell you on a plane. In case of emergency, put on your own oxygen mask first, and then you can help others. It's not selfishness, it's purely logical, because you're no use to anyone passed out on the floor. I think this particular session helped me a lot. It completely reframed self-care and being kind to myself in my mind. It's still hard, and I can be incredibly dense when it comes to actually acting on that rule. But I don't see it any longer as a frivolity that I shouldn't allow myself to indulge in. It's a necessity. And I know it's not only us with a diagnosis who need the reminder to be kind to themselves sometimes. So let me repeat this. Maybe somebody in this room, this round, needs to hear this today. In times of crisis, and honestly, any normal day too, being kind is essential. And that's true for being kind to others, but also never forget being kind to yourself. Give yourself air to breathe. Okay, I'm almost done, but I'd like to take just 2 more minutes to tell you why I'm telling you all of this. It's about time we all get used to talking about mental health. The numbers of people who suffer from depression and other issues have been high for years, even before the dumpster fire that is 2020 has happened, and all the crises that came afterwards, the war in Ukraine, the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis. We had a raspberry crisis for a while. It was just crisis after crisis after crisis. These are horrible, stressful times we live in, and they are taking their toll. Not many of us will come out of this with their psyche unscathed. Some will need professional psychological help, but not everybody will be able to get it. Some will be too ashamed, and some will not even see the symptoms as what they are, symptoms. So knowing the warning signs, knowing what you can do to look after your own mental health, and where and how you can get professional help if you need it, is more important than ever. Thankfully, mental health-related issues are discussed much more openly than they used to be, say 20, 30, 40 years ago. But the way we talk about them is still influenced by taboo and stigma and stereotypes. It's often seen as something dark, shameful, even evil. It's used to explain away all kinds of evil, from lone wolf shooters to warmongering oligarchs. And I'm sick of that. Because the vast majority of people who suffer from psychological conditions are normal people, like you and me. Odds are you all know somebody who does, but maybe you don't even know that they do. Because how often does anybody say, hey, I'm sorry I haven't called because it's just that I've been too depressed and too anxious, but today I'm a bit better, so I'd really like to have coffee together. So the image we have of mental illness is badly distorted. I realize not everybody will even want to talk about their psychological disorders, especially not in the workplace. But for me, it was the right decision. I was lucky enough to have been met with a lot of kindness, understanding, and support. And if there was something like a depression fairy godmother and she granted me a wish, I'd ask for everybody to be safe enough to talk about it if they want to. But as much as I hate to be the bearer of bad news, there's no such thing as a depression fairy godmother. So it's on us, on all of us, to do something about it. Making the realities of a once hushed up and invisible disease more visible and understandable is the first step. And we do that by having an open, unprejudiced conversation about it. So let's normalize talking about mental health and mental illness. Thank you so much for your attention. I think we have 3 minutes for questions, if you have any.
Thank you so much for sharing. And we actually do have a couple of questions. And I'll start with the first one, which is, how do you find the right time to talk about this? Just answering bluntly to a how are you question with blurting out the full story might not always be the best way.
It might not, but it can be. Sometimes it just needs out. So the right moment is the moment when you need to say it. So when people ask you, how are you, and you need to answer truthfully, then so be it. Otherwise, I think the right moment finds itself. Just find it before it's too much for you to deal with alone.
Okay, thank you. I could work with that.
I know it's not the perfect answer. How do you find the right moment? For me, it just happened. So I don't know how you do it better than just let it happen. I don't know.
And I think maybe there is no perfect answer.
Probably not, right? As much as there's no perfect moment, it's just, it needs to happen. So do it.
Thank you.
Talk.
Another question that has come up is, how do you overcome the fear of people not understanding? And
that's another tough one. Because honestly, after all these years of talking about it and the last few years of talking about it at conferences, I'm still nervous when I start speaking. Because, as I said, there are people who don't understand, and painful moments happen when people don't understand, especially when it's people who are near and dear to your heart. So how do you overcome the fear? Focus on the good people, the ones that understand, the ones that are there for you, the ones who sometimes don't know what to say, but still show their support in other ways by holding your hand, by looking at you, by hugging you when you need a hug. Focus on them, not on the people who don't understand or the people who are mean about it.
okay, so it's mostly about getting the right companions, the right alliances.
Yes, finding your people.
Okay, cool. Last thing that it's a little bit from the side, but might be interesting is there's so many mental health stuff in the app-verse going on, like breathing apps, meditation apps, mindfulness apps, sleep tracking, whatever. Is that, from your point of view, more something that's helpful, or is it distracting, or is it actually helpful?
Well, that depends on personal preferences. I don't use any apps. I find them, I don't know, I'm always scared that my data gets used for things I don't want it to be used, and my brain weasel data is not for algorithms. So I don't use any apps. What I do use is one of these GIFs that teaches box breathing, where you hold your breath for, I think, 4 counts, breathe in, hold for another 4, and then breathe out for another 4, and then so on. So it teaches you breathing, and it's super easy. You don't need an app for it. It's just a GIF. It's pronounced GIF. But there are other things. There's music that calms you down that you can use. But if there's an app out there that helps you, by all means, use it. Use whatever feels good.
Okay, question-wise, that's it. There are some more things people might want to talk with you about, but
I'm here for the entire day.
You heard her. So if you want to talk about something, find her somewhere around. Once again, from my side, thanks a lot for the talk.
Thank you for having me.
Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for your attention.